And as Chairman Benson is out of town, as Commissioner Dale just mentioned, but he should be calling in. He may not be on the phone line as of yet, but he's intending to call in this morning. So we have one proposed joinder agreement or modification, if you'll see behind tab G, is for the town of Carrollton. And they have requested to have Social Security coverage and retirement coverage with the Social Security effective October 31st, 2025, and the retirement coverage November 1st, 2025. We have performed our due diligence in the customary manner, looking from the legal perspective as well as the financial perspective. And if there are no questions, we would recommend that the town of Carrollton be approved for Social Security and retirement coverage with those effective dates that I mentioned and that are reflected in the packet.
There are no questions. If we could have a motion.
Motion.
Second.
Any discussion? No discussion. This motion and second. I'll take forms of vote as ayes. 4.
Aye.
Any opposers? Carries.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all we have for that committee.
All right, we'll call the administrative committee to order. Mr. Higgins, item number 1, 2026 board and committee meeting schedule.
Yes, sir, thank you, and that is behind tab C. You can see laid out there the board and committee schedule for 2026. In the top half are the regular scheduled board and committee meetings, and then down at the bottom are blocking dates for additional investment committees or claims committees should they be needed. This has been put together very similar to the way it was last year and the last couple of years with the dates listed out there in, like I said, a comparable way, and we would recommend approval of this schedule for calendar year 2026.
All right, committee members, you see the schedule there. Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor of the board and committee meeting schedule, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 2.
I believe that's behind tab D, and we have 2 PERS board election schedules, one for the one of the state employee representatives, and the next one for the municipal employee representative. The state employee slot is the first one. That will be the next one, but we thought we would go ahead and put 2 on here for approval of the board, consideration of the board for approval of the schedule just for planning and procurement purposes, working with the vendor and so on and so forth. It's laid out very similar to the way we've conducted the schedule for these elections in the past, and if there are no questions, we'd like to ask for your approval.
The committee members, you see the PERS board election schedule. Can I get a motion for approval?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 3, Ms. Higgins, you want to take these one at a time, or do you want to approve them all together? I think in our last meeting, we put them all together.
Yes, sir, I think that's correct, and I think approving them all together would be fine. Now, as far as how to proceed, I wanted to ask your preference and/or the preference of the committee. These, as you may remember, are Tier 5 related amendments. These are the same regulations for this item that we explained and went over in the last meeting. With initial adoption, there have been no changes or anything since the initial adoption, and they're largely just putting in throughout our various regs that are affected by the change in law. Would be happy to give you some time to read them or to have Ms. Lee come up maybe and help go through each one individually. But just to summarize, it has to do with talking about various things that were changed in the law with Tier 5 about reporting leave and compensation and using leave and all the various aspects through our regs. Again, we'd be happy to go through them, but I know we have some things we probably will discuss in a later committee. And it's the same ones and no changes. So would you prefer to go through them again, or you think the committee may be comfortable just moving forward?
I'm comfortable moving forward unless any committee member has any questions. This same language as we've already approved, correct?
Yes, sir.
I'd make a motion to approve as a group.
All right, we have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All Tier 5 regulations passed as presented. Next item.
Thank you. And this is Regulation 65, which is behind tab F. This one deals with earned compensation and the purposes of reporting that. as it relates to coroners and deputy coroners, or more formally, I think, and it's listed in the draft regulation about county medical examiners or county medical examiner investigators. This too is one that we went over last time. It remains the same as when we explained it during initial adoption. And this is just providing direction and clarity as it relates to that, especially for the deputy coroners. And we'd be happy to answer any questions, but if not, it's the same as last time. We'd like to ask for your approval.
All right, do I have a motion to approve Regulation 65 as presented?
So moved.
For a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Regulation 65 passes. Any other business, Mr. Higgins?
No, sir, that's all.
All right, we'll adjourn the administrative committee meeting.
All right, thank you. All right, you want to move forward to the legislative
All right,
committee?
let's move to the legislative committee. If you will report on that, please.
Yes, sir, thank you. So the first handout, I think, and I guess one of the only ones in the notebook, is behind tab H, I believe, which is described and on the agenda as ongoing and upcoming legislative activity. And we want to cover a few things here. I want to talk a little bit about the hearing, the House Select Committee hearing on Monday. And then we have two actuaries that are going to present some information from that hearing on Monday per request. And then I want to make sure and talk about two items that I think will come up certainly this year and have momentum, one being return to work / in-service distributions, and the other one about first responders. I'm going to say a few words, and then Ed Coble, CAVMAC, is going to present his slides that he used in the hearing on Monday. And then after that, we'll have Paul Wood, who's the actuary from GRS. He's going to call in by phone and go through his information. As far as the hearing, just briefly, as Ed's getting ready, it was a House Select Committee meeting on Monday. A couple of board members were in attendance to observe. All in all, it was similar to last meeting in respect to focus on funding. I thought it was a good meeting overall. The agenda was Ed Coble from CAVMAC and then Paul Wood from GRS. So we had two really good actuaries representing two really good firms, two of the best and largest in the country in the public pension arena. And then I was the third on the agenda. My comments were much like you'd expect. That was probably less than 5 minutes with a few questions, but nothing really unexpected. My comments generally focused on funding, the need for funding, and pursuing full funding. I mentioned the ADEC that the board recommended in the ADEC policy, and that likely would follow again this December. And noted that the ADEC recommendation was the only one the board had formally adopted, but acknowledged that all the scenarios would help PERS, and just encouraged them and thanked them for focusing on the funding and the importance of that, and mentioned that everyone involved should be in favor of funding. It should be nonpartisan, but then also that members and retirees should support additional funding because it helps the system, but also taxpayers in general, because doing the funding now will save taxpayer dollars because it only gets more expensive. So that's a quick synopsis. Those are not my exact words, but those were some of my themes, and we had a few questions that were not surprising or anything. And with that, unless you have any questions for me, I'd like to turn over to
Before you do, Ray, is it not true that some associations, either early responders or somebody, has asked the Stennis Institute to explore the possibility of creating another retirement to cut them out of PERS to be a separate retirement? Maybe that's just rumor. If it's more than rumor, what would that cost? What would that do?
Well, it all depends, but great point and great question. And if you'd like, we can go ahead and talk about that to some extent now, because by first responders, that was one of the things that I was going to talk about. So yes, you are correct. They have commissioned a study to review that and what other states are doing as far as retirement system and changes from first responders. I also think that there's some interest among some of our legislative members and others about pursuing that. And we do receive some questions on that. As it relates to the report, they did have that. Be happy to provide that to the board afterwards for your review. What I would say to it, while I certainly I appreciate the service provided by first responders, absolutely, and then I also respect their prerogative and ability to have the study or the report. What I would say about it, even though there's some good information there to be reviewed, it doesn't include anything about cost or costing it out, and actuaries were not involved. So should a bill actually emerge from that, that's something we would definitely have to look at very closely and get the actuaries involved. So happy to share that with the committee for you to look at it. But those are kind of my general comments on it. And I do have a little bit more to share on first responders during this committee. And if I can do that now, we can have some discussion, or we can wait till after the actuaries, whichever y'all.
Go ahead. I'm just interested in the cost, what it would cost PERS if that came about.
So we don't have a cost for that one, and that was actually one of the things not included in that report. And so if we get a bill, what I would recommend, if we get a bill or the main parameters of a potential bill, then we would provide those details to the actuary and they can cost it out. But without the details, we really can't say for sure. Now, there have been a couple of specific ideas and some more unique ideas that may be considered, and I don't know if some of those involved want to speak to that. So we have done some preliminary research, and Ed can talk about that. One of the ideas that has come up is a 6 for 5, as in 6 years of credit for 5 years of service. And in looking at that as an example, CAVMAC and Mr. Coble estimated that'd be roughly 2% of payroll for those involved, but it really depends. What I'll say more generally about that, and to your more specific question, we don't have an exact cost because we don't know what the details are, but there certainly will be a cost. As far as just the first responder idea in general for potential legislation, it certainly can be done. It just needs a law change and need to factor in the cost. A few things to consider before I turn it over to Ed. Each state's different. Some have them within the same system. Some have a new system. What I would say, though, if it comes to starting a new separate standalone first responder system, especially if you're allowing people to transfer in, you have to be careful there because the new system, and he can confirm this, but the new system would start off in the hole with an unfunded liability. Another thing you have to consider if you're taking members out of PERS is what is the impact of removing those members from PERS. Now, it may be relatively small in the grand scheme of things, but that's just something to look at. What would probably, speaking more generally, now I think there'll be some more specific ideas that legislators may propose, and those all certainly have merit, and some of the same themes apply to this. But just for general conversation, what I think probably could work well for a state like Mississippi is if the policymakers want to do that, is that you define whoever the first responder positions are, whatever that's going to be, whether it's police, firefighters, deputies, whatever it is, and they remain in PERS and they remain in the same tier, but they have different benefit parameters. For example, they may not have to work as long, or they may not have to reach the same age, but then somebody pays for that additional cost, whether it's the employer or employee or both. And I know some other states do it that way. So that's something like that is probably a good way if that's going to be considered to do it. As I begin to close out, I'll just share a few other things in the current posture of the last few years, though. With the new Tier 5, there is the option, and will be the option in the future, about those optional and variable contributions and additional contributions. So that's something that the locals could consider. As I understand it, and I would ask Ms. Lee to correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, at the local level, cities and counties and everything can match MDC, referring to Mississippi Deferred Comp now. So those are a couple of tools for additional compensation. And then we've got to remember all of these things will have a cost. And as you remember, a couple of years ago, some of the largest outcry of the concern of employer cost was at the local level. And the majority of first responders are at the local level. And that's where the majority of the concern came from, particularly from the municipal association. So that's something to keep in mind, because there will be an additional cost. So in closing, I certainly appreciate the service of first responders, but that's just some background on the potential considerations. And I'll send out that report and let you look at that. And then once we get some details, we could cost it out, but not really sure till we know what it is.
Some of you who've been on the board longer than I returned from a national meeting of teachers in the pension board. Aren't we somewhat, our system somewhat a little more all-encompassing than most states. A lot of states carve out the teachers and carve out other entities and are smaller, and ours is all-encompassing of everybody. Is that, I know the thinking was, in large numbers, I guess. Randy, were you on whenever they incorporated it, everything under PERS?
No, that was basically at the very beginning, I think. I was not on the board at that time, no.
Yeah, we're,
That was in the 50s.
You predate me too, Commissioner.
But what is the argument, is to begin to carve out entities that are under the big umbrella now? Is there a strength or weakness to that other than nobody wants to pay?
Well, cost is certainly a factor, and I'm gonna maybe ask Ed to comment, but how you described other states, you're right in your observation. It's really across the board. It really depends. Each state's a little different. We are a unified or a consolidated system where virtually all non-federal government positions are in PERS. And there are several other states like that. But then there are also states who have separate teacher systems. Some have separate police or fire. So it really just varies. We're definitely not the only one, but it varies across the country.
Yeah, it's very hard to, once you've had it all established and have been funding it and projecting out the sustainability of the plan to separate it out when you're 56% funded is probably not the best time to do it. Maybe if you're 100% funded, and we just, we have enough assets to cover all the liabilities, and then we do it then, and we move the number of assets for the liabilities that go to a new plan or to the separate plan. But to do it now is probably not the best time.
The people I hear from, they identify the problem, but very few of them have offered me some kind of solution. So this board recommended to the legislature what we thought would help some. And now that it's going to be, everybody's found something wrong with it. Well, where the hell were they whenever we were asking for suggestions? And where are they now when we ask for what can we do with PERS to strengthen it? Where are they? Where are the answers?
My sense on this conversation is like this. First off, this is a reaction to Tier 5.
That's correct.
And all that goes there. The second thing is that police officers have been talking to me. They say, why is our retirement not like the highway patrol? Which gives them the ability to retire earlier, gives them ability to do a second retirement within the state organization. So what we have is the first responders here, and that may include local police officers. I don't know who all's in that group. I have no idea. But I think it starts with Tier 5, and then the compared to their feeling about their job as compared to the highway patrol. They say, if highway patrol's carved out, why can't we be carved out? So I think that's where it is. And I think also that they're saying the legislature is now changing it up and actually has got another session before Tier 5 actually takes effect on March 1st, essentially. I mean, real close. So legislature just go ahead and fix this all at one time and give us what we want. So that would be my thought. Now, I'm like the director. I think it's all cost driven. And I think when we start splintering off our consolidated retirement system, I think it's going to be much more difficult because now you have different groups competing for the finite amount of money. You're not just funding one retirement system, you're funding multiple retirement systems. And I think that would create an issue for us in the state.
And it's not going to stop there. Once you carve out first responders, which, I mean, I have tons of articles in the folder over here about first responders having a problem with this. Teachers are gonna want it next. And I was just talking with the director of MDOT a few minutes ago, and he said, we may try to get a carve out. I mean, everybody's gonna want a carve out, and then, so you're taking so many pieces of a consolidated pie. You're exactly correct, that it's unaffordable at that point. So, I mean, everybody's gonna want a carve out, so.
And we're back to where nobody wanted to pay the 22.4 when we did that. And we're talking about a lot more money than 22.4 at this point.
Absolutely. It all comes down to cost. Great points all the way around, and a much more, I think, appropriate or feasible, and in the grand scheme of things, simple solution would be if somebody wanted to make changes, you just do it within PERS, and then there's additional costs within those new benefit parameters. You keep them in PERS, you just address the policy issue you want to and provide the appropriate funding. One thing that Dr. McCoy, I don't disagree with what Dr. McCoy said, but it did remind me of something I should have said in the beginning. As it relates to the first responder part and the years of service, that was actually something they were talking about prior to Tier 5. If memory serves, last couple of years, they've had bills introduced to somehow go back to 25 when it was 30. So that part's really not necessarily a new thing, and I should have mentioned that in my recap. But I agree with what you were saying.
It's still a carve out.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's still a carve out. So.
And that police highway patrol issue also existed before Tier 5.
Yeah.
But I didn't intend to get us completely off the subject, so, Mr. Director,
Well,
go ahead.
thank you for that. But that actually is very much on the subject for today, and was one of the items we were going to bring up. So that was a good discussion. I appreciate you mentioning it. And Ed, before we maybe go to other subjects, is there any more you want to add on that topic, or anything that I said or they asked, or anything you need to?
No, I think it was good conversation, but I think you handled it.
Well, and to be fair, in the comment that was made, obviously, you know, the highway patrol system was set up when it was set up. ORP was set up in 90. Every decision, 99, all of these predated members of this board and primarily members of this legislature. We inherited, what I inherited in 2020 was a system that was actuarial, not where it needed to be. And if I'm not mistaken, you know, when we moved to 19.9, that's 187 million more dollars annually that will be going into PERS. And to be fair, that's not the cost of current Tier 4 employees. That's paying off the old debt. And so everything we're talking about, and I don't love Tier 5. You know, I wish I could do more. I do think as time goes by, the legislature can certainly build to do more, but it cannot be lost that this was done by a series of decisions made in the 90s, made in the early 2000s, market conditions, things that happen. And this board, and I can speak for myself as a legislator, are committed to pay the benefits due to the people that are current employees. And everybody that's writing articles and everybody that's asking for studies, none of them are Tier 5 employees. They're Tier 1 through 4, which the very purpose of building Tier 5 was to secure Tier 1 through 4 benefits. So, you know, I'm very open to discussion. I've had numerous regional meetings. I have at least 2 or 3 more scheduled, specifically with law enforcement, first responders. And one of the things we're doing is talking through Tier 5. And when they realize some of the tools that are available to them in Tier 5, they like that. The other thing, though, I go back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, return to work. There's obviously a rub with Mississippi Highway Patrol retirement. If you want Mississippi Highway Patrol retirement, trooper schools are not full. So you can go get it. But one of the real rubs is that they can return to work in state government. I hope this year, and I obviously will come with something to this board to have them look at to approve, is a clean return to work policy. Because if we have people in the state of Mississippi who want to work, who have expertise in law enforcement and education in public works, and the fact that we make them jump through hoops or put limitations, if we can do it to where it is beneficial to the system and beneficial to that employee, I think that's helpful. Because let's be honest, 25-year retirement and 30-year retirement had most people retiring 10 to 15 years before they were 65. So they're not actually retiring. Most of them are not retiring, they are leaving state service, starting a retirement check, but they still have to have benefits. So it's something we need to make sure that we can do for our state employees is they have an opportunity to work if they want to work because they bring back expertise, they bring back mentorship. And, that's something that actually in the law enforcement community, because they have openings today. We have openings today in K-12 education. It's not like Tier 4 filled every slot. So we have challenges that we want to meet, but I do appreciate the board recognizing, and I want our members, beneficiaries, and employees to recognize what we're doing is to preserve Tier 1 through 4's benefits.
Absolutely on that.
I appreciate the comments of the senator, and I second that. And I would like for you to include the ability of retirees to pursue their expertise and use it in the legislature as well. So I would appreciate you putting that little piece in there.
As long as we've got the ethics position that you understand that voting yourself benefits is not something we're supposed to do. So that's been one of the biggest challenges is when people want to run. I think there's some excellent educators that would serve as legislators. But if the conversation always goes back to PERS, you're kind of starting out against the 8-ball. PERS is not a political issue, it's a math issue. And we've messed the math up for 30 years. So, yeah, somebody else probably deserves a shot at it.
Senator Sparks, I really appreciate your being on the cutting edge of this issue of PERS. You may not know what you're talking about, but you got us thinking that you do.
Well, I can tell you named it right, the cutting edge, because it cuts and I bleed, so.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to share something, but I don't know if I can follow that, so I'll just come back. I'll come back. We'll visit it later, but go ahead, Ed.
All right. Let's see. All right, we got it working now. Morning, pleasure to be here. It's not very typical that I get to present the same thing, the same presentation in 2 weeks, in the same week. So hopefully I'm, like my golf game, my second shot is always better than my first shot. So what we did on Monday is kind of give just a background of funding education to the members of the select hearing, House Select Hearing. So this is very basic. It's a lot of the stuff that you've seen me present to y'all before, but I think it's always good to get a refresher. So we start off talking about the actual funding equation. We talk about this all the time in how we want to make sure that we keep the plan stable, sustainable. There's always all those key words, but we basically want to make sure we're paying and we have enough money to pay out the retirement benefit payments to the retirees of PERS. That's the crucial basic point of funding for this. So that's money going out. So we need money coming in to the trust to be able to pay those benefit payments going out. And we get those in the way of contributions and investment earnings. So we have an investment assumption of 7%. And when you look at the projection of benefit payments, it's that contribution that is, that fluctuates. And it's fluctuated pretty up to high levels over the past few years to be able to pay those benefit payments going out. But the projection of benefit payments that I'll show here was pretty significant. And so this, I went back to prior to House Bill 1 being passed. So here we are a year ago today. This is what the projection of benefit payment stream looked like for PERS. And so I've got 3 different sections here. The Navy part is for current inactives, retirees, deferred vesteds, the anticipation of that group. They're currently being paid out a little over $3 billion in retiree benefits. Now, that part of that graph goes down over the next 20, 30 years, obviously, as retirees pass on, their benefits are declining. But what's coming behind them is the current actives. They're going to be retiring sometime in the future. And you see that part on top of the retiree benefit payments, just the Navy and the orange section, is we're going to grow to over $5 billion here within the next 20 years. We're at little over $3 billion now. We're going to grow to $5 billion again, over the next 20 years by 2044. But then they'll start declining as they retire and pass on, they'll retire. So this is a 50-year projection of benefit payments. And then the teal part of the graph brings in tier 5 folks who haven't even been hired in. We do these projections and we bring in hypothetical people into PERS to keep that population around 145,000 active members, and we can run them through for 50 years. Well, you see that the teal part doesn't really kind of kick in until at least 8 years from now. So when the first person from tier 5 is eligible to retire, maybe they're 62 and 8 with 8 years of service. But you see, it doesn't really get going until after 30 years, till the group after 30, 35 years, when a tier 5 member has had or new active has had a full service in PERS. So you see that continues to grow as well with the the cost of living adjustment increases that were part of that are part of tier 4. So you see that we're growing almost to $8.5 billion over the next 50 years. So when we throw in, now we look, so that's the B part of the equation, we talk about the contribution. Well, the contribution's easy, right? The contribution is set in statute right now. It's based on this schedule that the legislature passed in the 2024 session. That's basically said we're going to increase it, phase it into 19.9% of payroll. Well, we do our projections of active members and we can get a basic understanding of what payroll is going to look like. So it's just simple math there of taking 19.9 times the payroll in that given year is going to be the contributions coming in. So when we bring in contributions into this same graph, we have that black line there as the contributions. So right now in 2024, there's a $1.6 billion negative cash flow when we're just talking about contributions coming in and benefit payments going out. And it's a little hard to see in this graph, but between 2034 and 2054, that negative cash flow actually grows to $2.6 billion. Now, what are we left with in this funding equation is the I component. And so the I, the investment earnings that we're hoping that the trust fund will get, will barely make up this difference, right? It will make up the difference, which is great. We've got a nice trust fund of assets pooled together, and it will keep it stable. And so when we run our projections from the 2024 valuation, PERS is expected to stay stable over the next 30 years, right? To stay stable at a funded ratio at or near 56%. It's pretty much a straight line for the next 30 years based on this contribution level, our expectation of what benefit payments are going to go out, and getting an average of 7% investment earnings over this 30-year period. But the unfunded continues to grow, right? We've got interest that we're paying on that unfunded, just like you pay interest on your house mortgage. That continues to grow. We're at $26 billion. The green part of this bar chart is the unfunded liability. That continues to grow to $38 billion. Again, this was all last year. So now let's fast forward where the legislature has passed House Bill 1, which impacts that new actives of the Tier 5 group, right? So now this is just the DB, the defined benefit portion of a members in Tier 5's benefits going out of the trust fund. The DC portion is separate. They're going to be their benefit that they invest, and that's separate from what's going to be paid out of the trust fund here. So the navy and the orange part of the benefit payments doesn't change, right? That has not changed. What has changed is the teal part. That you can see the Tier 5 component of it with no guaranteed COLAs going forward it actually starts to decline over the next 50 years after it reaches its peak around 2054. So the contributions, again, the same 19.9 coming in, eventually, 50 years from now, could potentially be more than the benefit payments going up. Well, again, a lot of expectations going in there, but that's what we kind of are expecting. So tier 5, again, we've talked about is we've fixed the long-term problem or issue with PERS. We still have that negative cash flow as is concerning. So that's still reaching that $2.6 billion negative cash flow. So when we bring in House Bill 1 in the funded projection that I always show you during the Val, and we also bring in the FY25 investment experience that we just saw, 11.6% return, PERS looks better, right? It looks better than the funded ratio we showed you last year. So this is kind of where we're expecting to show you this year. We're working on the 2025 valuation, but this is what we expect it to look like, hopefully. All right, so it's looking better, but again, over the next 20 years, there's a potential for that unfunded to grow. It grows to about 28 billion in the next 10 to 15 years. But I wouldn't be a good actuary if I didn't warn you about the potential risk. Now, we always talk about investment risk is the most crucial risk to any pension plan, right? If we don't get 7% returns and, you know, the contributions are fixed, there's issues. So what I always do for you all in the Val presentation is show you the risk. And I have to do that as, you know, being your actuary. So what we did is say, okay, if there's one negative 5% here in the next 30 years, and we did it on the early side, we've now, and again, I don't have a crystal ball, I don't know, but we've just come through 4 out of 5 really good investment years. Everybody's kind of on edge. Is there's going to be an issue? Again, I don't know. Callan couldn't tell you. You know, we don't know. But if you were to get a negative 5% in 2027, say, this is what that graph goes to. Right? Just one bad year. All the rest of the years are 7% investment earnings. We go from 80% now down to 40%. Right? So that's the concern about getting the funding in and not trying to invest our way out of this, is getting the contributions up into the trust fund to help this. Because if we get more contributions in, that takes the pressure off the investment risk. So that's what actuaries kind of look at every day as part of this. So this unfunded grows to $40 billion based on this experience. So I'm not going to go through this. I kind of gave an education on Monday on what the ADEC is. You all know what it is. And this is kind of what we were looking at last year's valuation, and our expectation for the ADEC was 25.92. That's what we asked. That's what the board formally adopted to ask the legislature to fund. And you see, the majority of the component is to pay off the past debt, as Senator Sparks did say, right? That's the majority of the contribution that we're asking for. So that's what we asked for, and then we were asked as the actuaries, CABMAC was asked to provide, well, what if there's some additional funding coming? What if, you know, the employers are good at 19.9, maybe the state has some extra money, what can we do? So we were asked to look at several scenarios for the funding. So it's just a matter of putting extra cash in above the 19.9%, keep that up, but put in an additional lump sum of money each year. So I'll go through each of these scenarios. The current baseline is what I've showed you at getting to 81.1%. That's basically this chart right here, 81.1% by 2054. Option 1 is the board's formally adopted recommendation to the legislature, the 25.92% from 2024, we would get to 109.4% funded in 2054, actually 103% in 2047. So we would meet the funding policy that's put in place by the board. So these other 2 through 6 options, again, keep the 19.9% phased in based on the schedule I showed you, but putting in additional dollars in for each of the next 30 fiscal years. So option 2 shows $500 million in this fiscal year that we're currently in, and then $50 million additional in for this fiscal year and the next 9 thereafter. So for 10 years, we get an additional $50 million in. And you can see that it does improve above the baseline. We get to 72% in 2047 and 90.5% in 2054. Option 3 is putting in $100 million over the next 10 years. A little bit worse, that $500 million up front, even though it's the same basic dollar amount, it's basically $1 billion additional. That $500 million up front, we let the investment earnings work on top of that, that the actual funded ratio is a little bit better under this, under option 2 than option 3, even though it's the same exact dollar amount coming in. Now, if we put in $1 billion right now, again, a little bit better of a funded ratio. We let that investment earnings work. Option 5 is put in $200 million in each of the next 30 years. So again, that's pretty significant. That's a $6 billion of additional money coming in to PERS. So that really helps and gets to the plan of 109.3%, almost to where option 1 lands in 2054. And then option 6 was to put in $500 million up front and then $100 million in for basically the next 29 years. So again, to fund it over 30 years, putting in additional money for 30 years total. Again, we get to 99.5%. So again, these were just scenarios that we were asked to run our models through with putting in that additional money. Again, this includes all of House Bill 1 and the new tier and the ORP legislation, which is bringing in more money into PERS. All of that is embedded into all of these numbers. So that's basically what I presented on Monday. Again, a lot of the information that you've all seen, but I'm happy to answer any questions on any of these.
Ed, if you had just a simple recommendation for the next session of legislature, what would it be?
The ADEC. Sorry. That's why it's called the actually determined contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In talking about the ADEC, I want to be clear because from time to time when I talk with constituents or groups, retiree groups, they obviously know what the recommendation of the board is to fund ADEC, and they ask, why won't you just fund ADEC? Well, first of all, the cities and counties conversations that we've had obviously earlier, but to be fair, the ADEC's 25.92 is calculated this year. I think every year it would change based on investment returns and actuarial assumptions. And I believe the assumptions this board adopted would drop ADEC to 25.62. Seemed like it went down 0.3% based on the presentation that was made earlier this year, which again took in mortality changes, all those different things. But do you have a slide that shows the ADEC chart? Because if the legislature adopted ADEC in cities and counties, we just plowed right through and said, I'm sorry, it's 25.92. That number continues to rise as the spread rises, correct?
Yeah, it does rise a little bit, but with the investment earnings that we got in 25, the investment experience, it's a lot less volatile, and it doesn't grow to where it was earlier, where we were looking at growing to 40%. Okay. Right, it's more like in the 30s now, low 30s.
And one of the things, and I'm asking, but actuarial smoothing, that was something I'd never heard of until I was elected. but we do 5 years of smoothing, is that correct?
That's right.
Is that an average? Is that what smoothing is, or is that too simplistic?
It's not really, we kind of, just for basic math, we say you can take the average of the returns, but it's time value money. It's like 1 year may be more worth than the 5th year prior. But on average, if you just took the average 5-year returns, you get somewhere pretty close to our actual value return.
So, and you look in arrears 5 years, because that's what you're smoothing.
Right.
Then if you had a really good year, it's going to skew your number. So we had a 32.71% return. First of all, is that the number that was actually used in smoothing, or was it the number, because we bought the rate down
Right.
that year?
Yes.
Did that take away from the smoothing, or is that still included?
It's still included in the smoothing.
Okay.
Right, and just so everybody knows that we're running a deterministic projection. So we assume 7% is going to be experienced in all years going forward. So in these projections, the smoothing is gone
Okay.
after year 4.
But as we look at the smoothing, and the reason I asked this question is because it goes back to ADEC. ADEC's 2592, I think it was maybe 0.3 of a point less because of the assumption changes, experience.
Yeah.
But we're about to roll the 3271 off. In other words, we'll get 5 years past that big year, then we have a terrible year.
Right.
So would that not, if you're saying that's not included in calculating the ADEC,
Right.
then that's fine. But if not, we're going to see a bump in the ADEC when we lose the 32% year and have the 8% year.
Correct. Yes, you're exactly right, and you can see that in 2026, in the 3rd year of this chart, you see that little drop in the funded ratio. That's when the 30% is gone.
Okay, so even if we made 7%, we're going to see that. But then the year after that,
Right.
when the 8% loss rolls off, we'll see a bump that has nothing to do with returns if we made, okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the ADEC concern as a legislature. Number one, I'm binding future legislators, just like 30 years at 200 million, or, you know, what I want is a lump sum today with a legislature that I actually participate in with a future stream of income that maybe is enough that another legislature wouldn't withdraw it. But I just want to make sure from an ADEC standpoint, if this legislature adopted ADEC, the next legislature could look at it and that could spike for bad investments, whatever it may be, assumption changes, and then they're stuck with that number.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think I expressed some of the concerns Daniel does with the ADEC, and I've never been a fan of the 25. You know, I voted against it several times, you know, last time when we were talking about it. My concern with that is, you know, you look at the investments, and we're doing great. You said 4 out of 5 years we've done fantastic. Yeah, give or take, plus or minus.
Well, but that minus year
it wasn't that.
Was pretty powerful. Well, it was -8, but you were expecting 7.
That's right.
So
it wasn't as bad as it could have been.
Right. So you take the last 2 years where we got 11, we beat it by 4 each year. That -8 is more powerful than these 2 11s.
You were 15.5 below.
Yeah.
Because you wanted 7, you were 8.5.
Right, so you lost 15.
Yeah, you were down 15, correct. And I mean, you just don't know by 30 years how the market's going to be. And I know it's you know, the market, you may be down more than that. You may only make 2% 1 year. You don't know what the market's going to do. And hey, maybe for the next 30 years we make, you know, 15%. Who knows? I mean, we could strike it rich. But, you know, to me, I think this is where Daniel and I may disagree, but the 200 million kind of does what you want the ADEC to do without burdening the employer contribution and keeping it at 19% or ish. I mean, it kind of does what you want to do. And to me, it's kind of like funding the rainy day fund here in Mississippi. It's no different than just putting a little bit of cash away.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to take away from these options.
No.
These are great options. And keeping the employer rate at some rate. as actuaries, we want money in.
Well, no, it's just a
Right?
concern
We
from
want to
the,
make sure there's a steady stream of contributions coming in.
from the
It's
treasury
up to you
standpoint.
guys to determine where it
Well,
comes
from the,
from.
just coming from the treasury,
Right.
just looking at things and looking at all the investments we do, which are very similar to PERS. We have very similar investment strategy as PERS. So just looking ahead to the future, I mean, the ADEC is, it gets you to where you want to go, but, you know, burdening the employers with 25.9, and that may be 26 the next year, maybe 40 the next year, or we could go down, but it just kind of, it's a lot.
I think the other thing, and going back to what the treasurer said, is you talk about general funds. If I look at the pie chart right, 21% roughly of employees are city and counties. I think one's 11, one's 10. And if we go to ADEC or we raise the fixed contribution rate, we're passing that pain, if you will, that obligation along to everyone who has net pension liability, which is a piece of legislation that I intend to run again this year. This board has asked for it several years in a row, and we need to do that. But any of option 2 through 6 is the state in general tax dollars paying off liabilities of other employers, whether it's universities. But that's one of the things with cities and counties. We heard them when they said they couldn't go to 22.4. Now we hear through them, particularly with first responders and things of that magnitude, that they don't like Tier 5, but then they want us to use option 2 through 6 because clearly that helps pay off their net pension liability while keeping them at a fixed rate. So we're trying to find that happy medium between being fair to, first of all, our beneficiaries and taking care of those obligations, but also looking at the obligations where they are accrued, and that's the employer side.
I would say this, that all of these that we're looking at are cash infusions. And that all comes out of general funds. We have looked at in the past where about 66% of payroll is funded outside of general funds, if I'm not mistaken.
Sounds about right. A little
So
older estimate.
if, you know, we're proposing cash infusion, I think that this board needs to also look at the option of, rather than a cash infusion, if we would propose that it would be done through payroll and not a cash infusion, that the legislature look at that, then that money can be placed on the agencies to look at the federal dollars and the other dollars, and that would reduce the general dollars. So I think let's don't get locked in on just the cash infusion. There may be another way for us to get these dollars, and the legislature might have a way to balance between the general fund dollars and the local contribution in a way that they get to make that decision in some way. So I think that we need to carefully look at this other aspect of comparing with it going through payroll, the increased cost, and the cash infusion. I mean, if we're looking at $200 million, what does that do if we work that? So I think that there's another way that we need to share and reiterate, and if an actuary needs to do work on this, Ray, I think that we need to share that as a way to do it. I mean, we've already given them cash infusions, and now let's give the legislature payroll, how it can be done through payroll, and how it would be impacted if we use that methodology to get there as well.
And I agree with Dr. McCoy, and that was going to be my question too. Have y'all presented any kind of, if we just went to the ADC, ADEC, I mean, what the sources would be? Was any of that presented to any of the meetings that you all have been to recently?
Not recently, but we have put together something and shared that in the past. And one document, although I guess from last year, I think, is on the website that kind of gives an estimate of which agencies it would be, which takes into account some of the fund source issues, like cities and counties, you know.
And it breaks it up with all the governmental entities.
With the governmental entities,
You can make
yeah.
decisions if you wanted to say, okay, we're going to assist this group and with the state agencies, for example, we're going to let it go through our normal appropriations process because we as a legislature, the legislature controls that appropriations process, whereas they don't necessarily control the local municipalities and counties budget process. And if they chose to do some type of infusion to them, I assume that you could figure out a way to do that if they were trying to assist those entities. I don't know if that's something you can do under our current plan, but it seems to me that if you're trying to maximize the funding sources and you want to assist some of those entities and some of those you control the appropriations process, so you can directly help those entities out if you choose to do so. I think that would be very important for us to continue to communicate to the legislatures. And if they, I think I hear what you're saying, and I think everybody would agree, any type of infusion would generally be okay. So the policymakers could make a decision to do it the way they want to do it, but I do think we need to make sure we don't lose sight of maximizing the dollars through the appropriations process.
And not to add more stress to the situation, but I'm going to. And Daniel has to deal with it, the legislatures have to deal with it, Chris and I have to deal with it, that whatever we decide as a board and what the legislature decides as a board, and they know this, is that it needs to be significant, of significance, because if the credit agencies downgrade us, which they are threatening to do, then we will have to pay more on the back end to do projects that we want to do in this state, because our credit rating will not be nearly as good as it is today. So we need to do something that makes them somewhat happy to do it. And Daniel knows this, Chris knows this, all y'all know this. And I know it's not the board's responsibility, but we have to go after this and talk to them. And like I said, it may cost us a little bit more on the front end to do something for the PERS beneficiaries to pay off this debt that we've worked ourselves into. But in the end, if we don't do that, we're going to have to, the taxpayers will have to pay it one way or another.
I agree
That's
with
the
that
local
100%, but I know that's your job, but all the other agencies that are making the same plea that we're making, that's what y'all get paid for.
Well, and the treasurer's correct, but that also has a trickle-down effect into local units of government because, again, under the MPL, they have to list their portion of the PERS liability on their financial statements. So if Tishomingo County, where I'm from, whatever their portion of the pension liability is, will affect potentially their bond rating quicker than it'll affect the state of Mississippi. So, we're all speaking or singing from the same hymnal. We may not be on the same song, but we're singing from the same hymnal, in the sense that getting the debt going in the right direction is beneficial not only to the most important people, the members, but also to the units of government, is their financial stability.
And on option one, is that the legislature paying the ADEC, or is that moving the employer contribution to the ADEC?
It's moving the employer contribution.
So how is that different than using payroll to fund?
It's not. I was going to mention on that actually, the way to kind of accomplish 3 or 4 of those things would be just go to ADEC, or as far as you want toward that. Of course, we recommend the ADEC, but that would be part of payroll. It would cover the other fund sources. And then to Commissioner Graham's point, you could more in a targeted way help whichever group you.
Well, and it distributes it across general funds and agency payroll.
Exactly.
Well, it also drills down, because it could be a combination effect, I think was part of what Dr. McCoy was saying too. If you had some cash infusion and some payroll, but then you look distinctly into your payroll and say, how many of these are federally, paid jobs? Now, you can't jack their rate just because the feds are paying it, but, some of our state agencies generate special funds. Probation and parole, for instance, I think pays about 1/3 of their payroll out of self-generated funds. So while they're not general funds, they kind of have the same intent in the sense that that's part of their budget. But yeah, I do think drilling down into, agencies and saying, hey, where can we maximize, or if we had an increase of some sort, where would that land? And I think Mr. Breland has pointed that out several times on that federal side. Not leaving a federal pen empty, for sure.
And no question, one thing, and not to go down this path too much, but just to mention, and it's really an employer responsibility, But of course, they have to always be mindful of any rules or regulations associated with federal funds or federal grants and retirement payments. So just something they have to keep in mind, but the point's still the same and well taken for sure.
That's a very, very excellent discussion.
Thank you. Yes, the next that we have up is Mr. Paul Wood from GRS. Now, if you will, since he's on the phone, board and committee members should have a hard copy. It's the blue printed off PowerPoint to flip through. And we should have a few extras made up. If there are any members of the audience who want one, they're welcome to them, and we can get them that if they need it. But with that, Paul, are you there? Are you on the line?
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
All right. Wonderful. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I had a great experience on Monday meeting with some of the legislators, and hope maybe move the needle a little bit. But my main point when talking to them and talking with you this morning is to drill home that concept of pay now or pay a whole lot more later. So the purpose of this presentation is just to provide some education and thought on funding policy, and then look at different amortization strategies. So if you wanted to talk about, how we can pay down this unfunded liability that we have, what are some strategies? And just wanted to wrap up really briefly on a success story in the public sector where we saw a plan in Wyoming move from a fixed rate contribution, so similar to how you're funding your plan now, to an actuarially determined contribution funding arrangement. So I'm going to skip forward to slide 4. You don't need to know a whole lot about me. I unfortunately wasn't able to be there last year at your board meeting in October when we presented the audit results, but I did work on your audit. And so Paul Wood with GRS, over 22 years of experience. I am independent of the PERS system, so I'm not your actuary. Ed and CAVMAC are your actuary, but we were an outside advisor that helped audit the plan last year. Just a little history on GRS. We've been around since 1938. We are the largest provider of public sector actuarial services in the country. And we do spend a lot of time trying to support that long-term success of pension and OPEB plans. If we move forward to slide 5, I did just want to make this note because I think it's really important. I mentioned that I worked on the audit this time last year, and what I have laid out here is the conclusion from the audit. I'll spare you reading it, but basically the outcome was that it was a clean audit. And so what that means for you as a board is that you can take confidence in the numbers that Ed and CAVMAC are providing you. And so we were very close in our replication, both at the valuation date and then also the long-term projections. So again, the numbers that Ed is giving you do represent a best estimate of your plan's liabilities. We move to slide 6. I also had the opportunity to work last year and early this year with the Mississippi Joint Legislative Peer Committee. And we looked at different plan designs for a Tier 5, including a traditional defined benefit, a hybrid, and a defined contribution only plan design. The main conclusion coming out of that particular report was, regardless of what that Tier 5 looks like, an increase in the fixed contribution rate or lump sum funding would be needed to fully fund your plan over the long term. It's my understanding that the legislature did pass legislative bill number 1, which provided a new Tier 5. Well, this is very helpful to solve that sort of long-term issue. It didn't fully address the short-term needs on a contribution basis. So we'll skip forward 2 slides to slide number 8. And I think Ed did a really fantastic job of explaining this very powerful formula, C plus I equals B plus E. So I won't really belabor the point, but I do want to just point out that when you're funding a plan in the public sector on a fixed rate basis, there's so much pressure on an investment earnings piece. And that if you just even miss your investment earnings by even 50 basis points over a long period of time, it could put your plan in a difficult situation. And so this is juxtaposed with the ADC policy that you all have been discussing here for a little bit, which was a great discussion. If you have an ADC policy, your contribution rate is going to adjust to good and bad experience. So in a very good year, the rate may come down. In a poor year, the rate may go up a little bit. but it does help relieve some of that pressure on that investment portion of this particular equation. So slide number 9, we know that we're sitting here with an unfunded liability for the big plan of about $26 billion. And thankfully, that $26 billion is not all due today. So we have some time to be able to figure out a plan to help pay that down. And so our current contributions, that's going part of the way to paying that down, but then thinking about, okay, what else would be necessary to really make some significant progress on the unfunded liability. And so when we think about that plan for paying off the unfunded liability, there's a few methods that are generally available to us. There's level percent of pay funding, level dollar funding, lump sum payments, which we've talked a lot about this morning already, and then dedicated revenue streams. So something that's outside maybe the state budget. I think there's some lottery money that's potentially coming into your plan. So think about something like that. That could be an avenue that could be used. If we move to slide 10, I just wanted to give some details on what some of this means. Level percent of pay funding means you take your unfunded liability and you amortize it over a certain period, but you amortize it such that the dollar amount of contributions coming in to pay off that unfunded liability will grow as a dollar amount over time. And now I'm not sitting with you there, so you can't see me kind of gesticulating and raising my hands, but if you could just think about maybe the state's budget as this massive pie. And pension contribution is a sliver within that pie. So as the budget, as the pie gets bigger and bigger every single year, that sliver of pie is also going to grow and stay in about the same relationship to the big pie if we fund at the level percent of pay. So think about it as payments increasing at the same time the budget is increasing. When you divide the payments by the budget, it remains level as a percent. This does put some pressure on how your budget or payroll grows. If we do have budget or payroll growth that doesn't quite meet our expectations, then you're not going to be sending the dollars into the plan that you quite need. But then on the flip side, if you do see some budget growth and some payroll growth, you may end up getting additional contributions into your plan that could help pay down the unfunded liability a little bit sooner. On slide 11, this is juxtaposed to the what we call the level dollar method. And this is very similar to how you would pay off your mortgage on your house, where you take out a loan for your mortgage and you make level dollar payments. I know when I got my very first house, I was shocked by the printout of 360 monthly payments. It's like, wow, that's a lot of payments, but it stayed the same every single year. And so the theory here is that unlike a level percent of pay method, where the contribution dollar amount is growing, it's going to remain level. And so if we go back to our pie analogy and we think about the pie getting bigger, our little sliver for pension contributions is actually shrinking relative to the size of the pie as we move through time. And so generally speaking, and I'll show you a demonstration of this here in a few minutes, is if you have a level percent of pay policy, the contributions start out a little bit lower and then grow over time. And if you have a level dollar policy, it's going to start out a bit higher, but then remain level as a dollar amount or decreasing as the budget grows. So I did work up some amortization scenarios just to kind of drill home some of the concepts. This is just some theoretical information that's based upon your plan, but I wanted to demonstrate a few different things for you. So if we move to slide 13, again, our current situation, I think we're all aware of it, sitting under 60% funded, an unfunded liability of roughly $26 billion, and expected to be about 80 to 84% funded by the year 2056, so 30 years down the road. So I did explore different amortization methods, all with different periods. So funding over a 15-year period, both at the level dollar and a level percent, and then 20, 25, and 30 year. And I also took a look at what would be the impact of some short-term lump sum funding of $500 million, $1 billion, $2 billion, and then $4 billion. I do want to point out and thank Ed and CavMac for providing me some of the projection details that I used for this analysis. Without that, I don't think it would be right where it's at. So again, thank you to Ed and to CavMac for that. So we move on to slide 14. This is sort of the baseline scenario. This is what it's looking like right now based upon your current contribution levels and what your unfunded liability is going to look like over time. So that bar chart there is the unfunded liability. And so we're starting out again right around $26 billion on the left-hand side of the chart. And then it's expected to grow just a touch in the next couple of years. And I think this is related to what you had already discussed with your assets smoothing, where you're going to have a good year fall off and be replaced by a year that wasn't quite as good. So there's a little upward pressure on that unfunded amount. But you'll notice that that is going to stay north of $26 billion until right around 2044, 2045. That's a pretty significant amount of time. And so what this is really telling us is that over the next 15 to 20 years, the contributions aren't sufficient to be paying down that unfunded liability. And then if we fast forward to the year 2055 or 2056, we still are left over with $10 billion in unfunded liability after that time. And what I did also along the left-hand side, I have some statistics there, but I think the most interesting one here is the total contributions through 2056. So how much contribution dollars is the state and the cities and the counties and the other employers making over the next 30 years, and it's close to $70 billion in contributions. So keep that number just tucked in your head for a moment. We move to slide 15. This is one of the first amortization scenarios that I took a look at. And the bar chart again represents the unfunded liability. And then there's two lines on there as well. The orange line is funding as a level dollar amount. And so this is the percent of pay necessary to pay down the unfunded liability. And you can see that it's decreasing as a percent over time because that payment's remaining level while your payroll is growing. And then the blue line is the level percent of pay method, where the contribution dollar amount will grow over time in relation to how payroll is growing. And so you can see that there's a pretty big cliff that happens right around 2041 that also corresponds with the point at which, under a 15-year policy, you would pay off your unfunded liability. And at that point, the only contributions that would be necessary to fund the plan from the employer's perspective is the employer normal cost, which is quite low. It's a percent or two of pay. Now, I mentioned earlier that we're currently on a schedule to make roughly $70 billion in contributions over the next 30 years. If you were to fund this plan over a 15-year period, and we looked at that same 30-year contribution projection, under a 15-year policy, you would be paying roughly $42 to $43 billion in contributing period. So a 20-year funding period, you sort of see the similar patterns here with the level dollar and the level percent, and then the big drop off once our unfunded liability is paid off. And if you were to stretch this policy and this funding policy over a 20-year period, then you're looking somewhere between $48 and $50 billion over that 30-year period. Took it one step further with a 25-year amortization, which is relatively close to the board's current policy right now. And again, similar pattern where we start to see that unfunded liability go down. It goes down a little bit quicker when we're using a level dollar method because you're making more contributions up front. And over that 30-year period, anywhere between 54 and 58 billion dollars in contributions. And then finally, a similar exercise with 30-year, and this is on slide 18. And you can see that under the 30-year policy, everything's stretched out even further. And over that 30-year policy, we do end up paying off that unfunded liability over 30 years, but we're still looking at contributions somewhere between $60 and $70 billion over that 30-year period. And so this would be something that I wouldn't recommend to any of my clients unless they absolutely needed it, because the 30-year policy does put a lot of pressure still on those contribution rates. And then you can see that if you use 30-year level percent of pay, which is that blue bar there, and we see what happens to the unfunded liability, it still takes 10 to 12 years before we start making significant progress on paying off that unfunded liability. We move forward to slide 19. This is just a chart of what it would look like if we had some lump sum funding in the short term. So one is similar to what Ed already presented, but if we had $500 million of a lump sum contribution, we would expect that 2045 funded ratio would be about 67%, so we'd make some good progress. And then by 2055, we would see about a 90% funded ratio. The $1 billion would get us to about 96% in 2055, and then the $2 and the $4 billion would help pay off that unfunded liability completely prior to that 2055 date. And you can look at the total contributions over the 30-year period, the $500 million lump sum. It's going to result in about $70 billion. The $1 billion, just a little bit more than that. And then you start to see those real savings come in when those lump sums become higher in the short term. So just by contributing an additional $4 billion today, that would save us over a 30-year period, probably somewhere between $15 and $17 billion. So you can see just how effective lump sum funding can be. The one little caveat, I think we've seen, and Ed can probably attest to this as well, and we saw a day in the public sector pension world where pension obligation bonds were issued and these large sums of money were dropped into these plans at one time, and then we experienced a market downturn, and it didn't turn out well for some of those plans. And so if you do have this significant lump sum funding, it may not be a terrible idea to stretch it out over a few years to help manage like the deployment of capital, so you're not impacted by a very large market downturn in the short run here. On slide 20, just to summarize, I think as an actuary that's not intimately involved in your plan, but looking from the outside in, it does seem to me that the PERS plan does need additional funding. Even under the baseline scenario, if everything works out perfectly and we hit 7% on the dot every single year, we're still left with $10 billion in unfunded liability after a 30-year period. Then if we look at those different funding policies, all things being equal, funding as a level dollar amount will always result in fewer overall contributions relative to a level percent of pay amount. The lump sum funding can quickly bolster the funded status of the plan. So again, it can help us in the short term and then has great long-term ramifications. And then just again, that message of pay now or you do end up paying a whole lot more later. So maybe I'll pause there before I just spend just 2 minutes on the recent success story to see if there are any questions or any thoughts that the board may have that I could potentially address.
Any questions? Here none.
All right. So on slide 22, I did want to talk for a moment about what Wyoming did, because it's a client of mine, and for many years they've been funding on a fixed rate basis, and they were constantly trying to play catch up. And one of the key messages or key thoughts that came out of a lot of the analysis that we did for Wyoming was that there's hidden volatility to fixed rate funding. So you're never going to fully catch up, and you're always going to be chasing your tail and say, okay, well, next year we need another increase, so let's increase it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. And it turns out that it's not actually fixed rate contribution funding, but it's really delayed catch-up funding, if you will. And so in this particular plan, their shortfall from their fixed rate to the ADC was a little bit smaller than yours. It was only about 2%. And I was asked when I was presenting in front of the Joint Appropriations Committee up in Wyoming one day, well, is there a better way to do this? And my answer was a resounding yes, there is. And that's through actuarially determined contribution funding. On slide 23, these are the gory details. I won't go through them all. But what we ended up settling on was a plan to get us on path to that actuarially determined contribution funding. And so it wasn't going to happen overnight, because that would put too much pressure on the budgets around the state. And so we came up with a plan where we're going to move the rate every couple of years, and we put some guardrails on it. So the rate couldn't go up by more than 0.5% of pay every 2 years. And so the way it's working out for Wyoming is that they're probably going to be at their actuarially determined contribution by the time we set rates on July 1, 2028. It's going to take a couple of cycles for them. The other interesting component here is that once the rate goes up, it can't come back down until you've reached they chose 99% funded. And so what this is going to mean is that once you get to that ADC point, that if you have good experience, the rate's not going to adjust down, and it's going to provide additional funding to the plan and speed up the funding of the unfunded liability. And so this is a nice way to bridge the gap between where we were today and where we know we want to be 5 or 6 years down the road. So slide 24, House Bill 83 in Wyoming passed both houses, was signed by the governor, and it put us on that path from a fixed rate contribution funding policy to an actuarially determined funding policy, while at the same time meeting the needs of most of the stakeholders within the state. And so I do say the last bullet point, it can be done. It wasn't easy. It's not an easy lift to do this, and I absolutely recognize that. Looking back on it, we can say, oh, yeah, it was a pretty quick process, but it took us a good year and a half of education to get everyone on board. And ultimately, the plan was successful in getting this through, and I think this is going to go a long way to ensuring benefits sustainability in the state of Wyoming. So happy to stand for any questions and appreciate the time with you all this morning.
I have one question of him is, what is the employees' contribution rate in Wyoming right now?
Yeah, so right now the employees come July 1, 2026, we pay 9.49% of pay contribution. The employer will be making roughly 9.62%.
Do you know if they are a Social Security state, Paul?
I believe they are a Social Security state, yes.
And what's the normal cost of their plan?
The normal cost of their plan, it's going to be lower than, it's going to be a little bit lower than yours because they don't offer a COLA. So it's somewhere in the neighborhood of the long run normal costs right around 10% of pay.
Are there any further questions of Mr. Wood?
One thing, if I may, and I think for Ed or Mr. Wood, is when you ran your 30-year amortization schedule, you're at 2.26, so we're about 2.25 points below that if we use the 19.9, which we're headed to. That's one of the things about the ADEC I didn't say earlier. This was determined in 2017 that it was going to be the result in 2047. So the ADEC has climbed on us, not just because of investments or contributions, but because the window now is 8 years shorter than when it was adopted, because you're still using ADEC for a 2047 outcome. Is that correct?
Yeah, the funding policy from the board has the funding goal of 2047. So we're at 22 years now.
Because if I'm doing the math right, if we've got a 21.62% of pay is 1.71 billion, then our payroll is about 7.7 billion as a state. That's 77 million roughly per point. So if the ADEC, and that's the other thing about the ADEC, is we're just up against that arbitrary 2047 that we set, versus if you look at a 30-year funding formula, we're obviously closer at the 19.9, leaving about $180 million shortfall probably from what would be ADEC over 30 years. Is that fair?
Well, while he's doing that, I'll say this.
Quick math? Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I follow that, but I think one of the main parts you're referring to, and Ed, you and Paul may want to talk to this, is just the changes in the public pension industry, if you will, the actuarial standards board and the actuarial recommendations to have tighter and different amortizations, moving toward a closed amortization as opposed to open, and then those shorter periods. And what was done around the 2017, 2018, from memory, was the unfunded at that time was, for the purposes of the ADEC, amortized at 30 years, and then future experience at 25-year closed. And that translates to what you were saying, a tighter period, tighter methods. But I think that's driven by actuarial standards.
Yeah, and I'll give a little bit of history.
Before you answer, Ed, do you mind, this is part of that question too. Does that volatility, what volatility is there with investment returns? does that get more volatile the closer you get to the end of that closed period compared to the beginning?
So I'll answer that question first. So we use layered amortization. So each year's gain or loss, investment earnings are part of that on an annual basis, are amortized over a 25-year closed period. So there's no volatility as we continue on with that.
Okay.
The first going back to the first part of the question, just a history of the 2047. We actually, in 2012, we set the policy, the funding policy for 30-year amortization. So it originally started at 2042 as to, that was the goal to reach 100% funded. And then we did kick the can down the road 5 years, but like Mr. Higgins said, the actual community, they just issued a white paper last year. That is really where, to not recommend 30-year amortization anymore. It's, the past generations of actuaries have just done that. And you alluded to an issue that this was growing over time. And it would, unfortunately, back before the 90s, when everything was great, it was just, fund PERS with whatever you can. And the amortization period back then was 40 years.
Right.
So, yeah, we've gotten tighter. The actual community has gotten tighter on our assumptions and methods, which has kind of caused this number to be what it is today.
Right, and I just want to be fair, because again, when the board adopts ADEC and our constituents look at us as elected officials and say, why don't you just adopt ADEC? The conversation doesn't usually last long enough to say, well, we're actually into 22 years of the old debt and staggered debt, layered amortization on the rest of them, and we changed the assumption from 7.75 to 7 on anticipated rate of return. So it's ballooned this liability, because when our friends from Alabama presented, they're still at 7.75 or
7.45.
So now they're at 7.45, and they're stepping theirs down. But their funded status, and they had 6 or 8 different retirement plans, if I remember correctly, Mr. Dale, is that, they had carve-outs for all these different things and different contribution rates within those. But if they had adjusted to 7 where they're headed, their funded percentage wasn't but 3 or 4 points higher than Mississippi. So it's a national issue. So I get that the actuaries across the country have started tightening it, but I just want to be sure that, our constituents understand, as well as the members and beneficiaries, is that this is a closing window on an arbitrary date that was chosen, which is what this legislature is being asked to do with this year's budget and next year's budget. So it's not that we're not all saying we want to pay it off. It's just obviously more money up front pays it off quicker. We all understand that. But I just want to be clear that ADEC is not only affected by income returns of investments, it's affected by actuarial assumptions that change.
Right.
And it's also affected by closed amortization period that no one did anything since 12 when you first started it, and then 17 until ultimately $110 million got put in 22. I mean, that's the first action until what we're seeing today.
Well, and
Look, can I mention one thing? Just got to note that the folks on the phone can hear each other, but not us. So can we,
well, that's unfortunate.
is there anything you check? I'm sorry, go ahead, whoever.
The ADEC, I mean, it looks good on paper and everything, and I mean, it gets you, like I said earlier, to where you want to go. But my concern is still what it was 3-4 years ago with ADEC. It has a law of unintended consequences. Communities, local communities of smaller parts of the state will have to likely cut employees, cut services that those places need to get to 25.9 to pay that employer contribution. And I don't know, it looks good, but it's not fair to them to cut that to pay for this liability when we could do it another way. And yeah, I know the legislature might give them a bailout, but why not just pay upfront instead of cutting their services? And that really is a problem. I know, Senator Blunt, that's something you've been concerned about in the past.
Yes, sir, it is. I found some numbers, and I think they're about a year old. I think to pay the ADEC, at the time, it was going to rise to 22.4 over a 5-year period. I was interested in the impact on cities and counties. I just looked those numbers up. The state could cover the entire cost of the increase in the ADEC for about $69 million for every city and county. So that was something that you and I discussed a couple of years ago. I still think that's something we should do. The thing about ADEC is it holds the legislature accountable to fulfill an obligation, and particularly, I know everybody in the legislature looks at what this board recommends, and y'all recommended a couple of years ago about this time for the legislature to fund the actual defined contribution, and the legislature responded by changing the law because they didn't want to do it. That's what happened, and so I do think the thing I've learned in this meeting that has been very helpful to me is the point raised by Commissioner Graham and Dr. McCoy is, and people in the appropriations process know this, is the impact on special funds and federal funds in paying the employer portion, which are not always reflected in the general fund, just a general fund scenario contribution. So I think that's something that we definitely need to present to the legislature. But I think how to hold multiple legislatures, because this is going to be, we've got an election in 2 years, how to hold the next legislature accountable from just an arbitrary number that is what they want to pay and not necessarily what's needed. That's always been the attraction of the ADEC to me.
If just due to some technical difficulties, we're about to reset the phone line, so you may hear some noise.
I can repeat all that if I need to.
Oh, yeah, that's right, that's right.
Welcome to AT&T's teleconference service. Please enter your access code, followed by the pound sign. To join the conference as the host, press star. Otherwise, press #. Please enter your host password, followed by the pound sign. There are 3 participants on the call, including you. You are joining your conference as the host. For a menu of available commands, press star pound.
All right, Chairman Benson, can you hear us now?
Yes, I've got you now. I hear you.
Okay, Mr. Wood, Paul Wood, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here still.
Okay, good deal. Sorry for those technical difficulties. And let me ask, I don't think it was added. Is on? They're on? Let me make sure. Audra, are you there with Ice Miller? They may need to call back in. The number didn't sound right, but we don't need them just yet. But if you don't mind letting her know. All right, thank you. Sorry about that. Please continue.
Any questions?
This may not be a fair question. Have you all, I may have been in the audience in 2017 or 2018 when that policy was adopted. I was not on the board. Is that when it was adopted, the funding policy that we're under now, technically that we're under now? It's been revised a little bit since then.
That's correct. It was a lot of work and some work sessions and things of that nature went through, and I guess around that time frame. And I remember this because it was just prior to me joining PERS. So there were a lot of work sessions leading up to it, and I think it was formally adopted in June of 2018, I think. Based on the 17.
That sounds right.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't remember exactly, but that sounds right.
Yeah.
Are you all recommending that we go back and revisit anything in the funding policy, such as the 2047 date or anything else in the policy? I know a year or two ago, we sidestepped the policy when we went from 7.55 to 7.0, and I don't think we changed the policy at that point when we made that decision. Do you guys recommend that we go back and look at the funding policy?
Don't have any recommendations today, certainly not, but that is something we can always look at. I don't know that there'd be any recommended changes other than, it's certainly not lost on me that contrary to back then, well, I say that, I wasn't involved that much personally back then, but just speaking to more recent times, it seems like there's been a more holistic review of PERS when it comes to pension reform with the Tier 5, the ORP reform with additional money coming in, an increase in the rate that's in the law going to 19.9. I know that's not the ADEC, but still an increase in the rate. And now what appears to be some very, very serious consideration around additional funding or increased rates or something. So I think per your question, it's probably reasonable to look at that and see if you want to recalibrate or evaluate the topic of, do you want to recalibrate the schedule, if you will. That's about the only thing that comes to mind in light of of pension reform and significant additional funding. Do you want to review that and see that? But I think we're still going to need to be mindful of, and I've thought about that previously when some of these things going on, but we'll need to be mindful to consider the actuarial implications and recommendations, especially as fiduciaries. So it may be a little bit of a longer answer. Nothing today, but that's one aspect that comes to mind, and we can look at it in future meetings.
Well, yeah, speaking of not today, because of that, when do we need, and the legislature representatives can answer this question, but when, I assume the board needs to come up with a recommendation and then submit it to you all to sell across the street. When should we do that?
Well, I think for all intents and purposes, you have, and it's in the process. And what I would say, I'd refer to last year with the ADEC and the 25.92. I would refer to the current board funding policy to recommend the ADEC. And then what's already scheduled and in the works is they'll be back in December to present the new information. And it'd be at that time that we would recommend to the board what it should be. And depending on your action, we would submit that to the legislature. So all I'd say December.
So December. Long answer short.
Yeah, exactly, December.
Mr. Graham, I was searching my mind about what you asked. Yes, we did talk about doing away in the funding policy with that ADEC. And I opposed doing away with it because it always gave us something with it, employees. It was left in, but also back when we did that, we did the 25-year, as I recall, and we closed that, and then everything after that, I can't remember what you call it exactly, but
it's on the screen here. It's called layered amortization. So
Okay,
what we did in 2018 is we closed that original unfunded balance over a 30-year period. And then every piece, every year we've had either a gain or loss, and we've had losses every year, but we're spreading those over its own closed 25-year period based on this schedule. And
go ahead.
I just was going to add, we have, the funding policy is reviewed every year. So, it's part of the yearly review of the policy. And we've changed. You've seen the signal light stuff that we've added to the funding policy to kind of incorporate that, those change around the fixed contribution rate. So just wanted to add.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that we haven't looked at it.
Yeah.
In terms of an overhaul of it.
Yeah, we haven't overhauled the assumptions, but yeah.
Dr. McCoy, you had a question?
I did. I had one more comment with the treasurer. I do think that we were empowered and asked by the legislature on anything that might impact the funding and the raising of the ADEC in any way that we make recommendations. And I think that we need to vote, and we need to be very clear where we are and where we stand. So there's nothing. And I was going to mention that I would want to wait till I had the latest information in December.
Yeah.
But knowing that, I'm going to be pondering that between now and then with what we've been shared today. So
I just wanted to make sure they had enough time to start selling it over there
yes,
to get everybody on board.
I understand. I did have a couple of 3 questions that I wanted to ask Mr. Chairman about the additional funding scenarios, how those came about. And I know that, the current ADEC, that's what we had voted on. But those other 5, how did those come to be? Who requested those, or were those inventions of you and our actuary? How did those come to be?
Sure, little bit of both. It was in response to all the interest and committees and requests for information and so on and so forth around funding PERS. As far as the exact sheet, some of them, a couple I think were requested from Senator Sparks. A couple I added, like the ADEC, and of course the baseline, like Ed added. I think another one was mentioned in the committee, which was really an offspring from a sheet we put together from the treasurer in the spring. And then one, I think, it was mentioned in a press conference or something. But to sum up, combination of requested information or a couple scenarios that I added to the list, but all of them basically directly or indirectly mentioned or requested or discussed in the public sphere, best I can remember.
Well, in the future, for me, I think that when we get something like this, I guess we got this within the last 2 weeks, is when we saw this for the first time. When these things are different scenarios, I think it would be helpful for me if I knew who had requested those, if it was outside staff doing that, and I consider Ed part of staff, because it helps me navigate what I see as the impact that we would have on the legislature pursuing the finite resources that we have, just to navigate where it's coming from and that sort of thing. My last question has to do with, or 2 questions has to do with GRS. Were they specifically requested by the committee to make a presentation, or did GRS ask them to let them come?
Let's confirm with Paul, but to the best of my knowledge, the committee, some of the staff members with the committee reached out to GRS and asked them to attend. Paul, could you confirm that?
I can.
That's correct. Yeah, we were actually asked to attend the first meeting, and we were just given a couple of days' notice and weren't able to make that. And then for the second one, we were given proper notice and were able to have some discussions.
And then the last question that I had was, I'm assuming the legislature then is paying GRS for their time for this presentation.
I'm not familiar with. Go ahead,
Paul. I'll be completely honest. I think it's the state's policy not to reimburse for work like this. So we did this out of our own pockets and to try and help advance your plan and just the public sector pension space in general. So it was of no cost to anyone but us.
Just for a little, I guess, if somebody wants to take ownership, option 3 was clearly talked about during the legislative session as a diversion from some legislators of $100 million a year for 10 years. I'll put my name by option 2 because I prefer that. Number one, it's a lump sum upfront while we have the money, not worried about the next 10 years coming up with $100 million every year. Plus, I didn't want to divert money away from the educational enhancement funds or transportation, because that was lottery monies. And it's also worth about $300 million more dollars, I think, if you put $500 million in and 50 a year versus 100 a year. They're both $1 billion, but time value of money growth is 300 million better. So I specifically even had a bill during the special session for that. So I'll take ownership of option 2.
And then I'll take ownership of option 5. I mean, I've had several financial groups look at option 5. I've had, it's just the one that makes the most affordable sense, that makes the credit agencies happy and moves us on and gets us into the right direction.
I was aware of your.
I'm just saying this, we're claiming things.
Your interest in that particular.
Well, I didn't want anybody to have to hire a detective and pay it out of PERS. I'll own what I say. So
I mean, since we're owning things right now.
I'm done.
All right, are there further questions of anybody? Ed, you Ray, either one?
Those are just to make sure if, just real quick, Paul, is there anything you'd like to add before we drop off and go to a different topic?
No, I appreciate being able to talk with everyone this morning and with the committee on Monday, and I look forward to seeing what comes out of all this. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
All right, Mr. Director, what, any further?
Yes, sir. Let me make sure, if Audra from Ice Miller is on the line.
Yes, you have those, myself and Rob. Rob will be on for the next 15 minutes. Drop for another call.
Okay, thank you all for joining us. I had a few more things to say, but I do want to go back and revisit one of those other topics briefly, referring to return to work. And sometimes it may involve in-service distributions. I had more than I was originally going to say, but in the interest of time, I'll just save that and maybe it'll come up through the dialogue or I can do it another time. I want to make sure and try to make use of the time while we have them on the phone from a legal standpoint and our actuaries here beside us as well. But just real quickly, return to work, as Senator Sparks mentioned earlier, I personally think that has more momentum. It's been around the last couple of years with legislation being introduced, but there seems to be more interest this year. It seems to have a little bit more momentum. Senator Sparks mentioned it previously. I've also heard indirectly, like in the best I can remember from somewhere in the public, whether it be radio or news or whatnot, that maybe House and Senate leadership or variations of them seem to be interested. So I wanted to mention that. And in short, what I would say when it comes to return to work is it can certainly be done. You just have to consider the policy implications, which of course they are the legislature or they are the policy makers. You need to make sure you comply with any IRS requirements, which could be done. And then very importantly, and what may be one of the most important factors here, is you have to consider the cost implications, and that's where the actuary comes in. So with that, I was going to say more, but I'm going to pause now in case you have any questions while we have the experts, the outside consultants with us. Questions or concerns or from any particular areas.
Any questions? All right, continue.
I think the only questions I would have, I was going to ask Ed and let Ice Miller go through it, but I think there's a 90-day set out. If that's an IRS requirement, then obviously we can't change that. Then if someone was to return to work and you took away this 25% or 50% of work, 50% of pay, that the employer would have to pay both sides of PERS. They'd have to pay the employer piece and the employee piece, at least as a contribution, because the employee cannot pay into the system while receiving from the system, as I understand it. And then the other would be, what qualifies them for health care, what qualifies them for benefits. In other words, they would enter into an arrangement, and I'll use DOR or audit department, treasury. You hire an accountant. You have somebody that has reached their years to retire. They're eligible to retire. They chose to retire. They're not 65 years of age. They have a desire to continue to work. They have expertise. I'm hearing this from our counties, particularly with law enforcement, with fire, with public works. They would gladly hire someone back who maybe wants to work 3 days a week or, some schedule that they work out with their employer enough that they have benefits, but they'll also pay the 9% markup to make PERS whole because I'm hiring a mature, experienced, seasoned employee. That's the general nature of it. So whether it's in the classroom, whether someone wanted to come back and teach, be a literacy coach, some of these things, bus drivers. I have problems all across the specter of government of hiring people. So if Mississippians want to work and we're telling them we've got hurdles you have to jump through, as long as we're not hurting the system, I just want a clean return to work policy that complies with, federal law and is a positive to the system.
We already have a return to work that is clean. It's just that you can only work half-time. You don't get any benefits.
Why would I want to tell someone?
I'm just saying we have a clean return to work. I don't know whether it fits somebody's needs or not. We have that. And we also have legislation about people that are elected to city and county offices, and that's clean and that's done. Limitations on how much they can earn. So we already have satisfied those, but it may take some legislation to make that clean. I don't know that, but that's where I would get into the question with Ice Miller.
And clean may be a poor choice of words. How about unrestricted? Because, and I don't mean completely unrestricted, but it goes back to health care. It goes back to insurance. So if they're unable to have benefits, they're going to go work at Home Depot when we'd rather have them in the home office.
So one thing I'll say is, and then maybe if Audra and Rob want to add more, or we shift to the cost part, but to some of the parts, some of the earlier parts of that, the IRS requires a bona fide break-in service, which includes no prearranged agreement, things of that nature. So they require that. But state law sets it at 90 days. So you have to have the break-in service, but it doesn't necessarily have to be 90 days. But that, of course, would require a law change. But that's something just to give you the background. So it's the, but then I guess, Ice Miller, do you want to add any more to that or to some of the other questions before Ed maybe speaks to cost implications?
This is Audra. Ray, we agree with you. The 90 days is set by state law. Federal law requires a bona fide break-in service, but there is no safe harbor for that. So, for example, you have 90 days, but if somebody entered into a prearranged agreement with their employer to return to work, then the 90 days doesn't save them from that. So it has to be a bona fide break-in service of at least 90 days under your state law. You'll see some states have a 30-day. Some go all the way up to a year. Again, the key is under federal law, it has to have a bona fide break-in service, which means no prearranged agreement to return to employment.
Thank you. Thank you. Another thing that's kind of a related topic, and this may go to the more of the use of the word unrestricted, is having an in-service distribution for those that are 59 and a half. That may speak to some of what he was referring to. You want to speak to that briefly?
Is that directed at me, Ray?
Yes, please. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay. So, yes, under federal law, you can have an in-service distribution, which means a prearranged agreement. You wouldn't have to have the break-in service. Somebody could retire and continue to work in some capacity, however that is designed. The restrictions under federal law from a plan qualification is it's the earlier of age 59 and a half or normal retirement age. The reason why Ray is saying 59 and a half is that's the cleanest way, that word clean is being used, but it's the cleanest way to do it because if the member is at normal retirement age, so it's allowable under federal law, but they're under age 59 and a half, the individual will be subject to a 10% early distribution penalty. So the 59 and a half is the best approach to do it so that not only does it comply with plan qualification requirements, that the individual is at least 59 and a half, but then the member will not be subject to the 10% early distribution penalty either.
Ray, let me just add to that, agreeing with everything Audra just said. One of the parts of the question was related to health care, and recognizing that this would take a statutory change, but the Internal Revenue Code doesn't limit how much an individual can make when they're reemployed or what benefits they receive. It's a matter of following the plan terms, or in this case, policy decisions being made as to whether or not they want to allow additional benefits or raise the limit on how much could be earned.
And in this case, policy or plan requirements would be state law, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Go ahead.
Ray, on the county level, we can provide insurance to a retiree. There's nothing that prohibits us as long as our insurance coverage allows us. So on the local level, we can provide health insurance if the county, if the individual county wants to do that and their coverage allows that.
Is there an hours requirement under your county?
No.
One thing too, just briefly to keep in mind, and it has to do with our IRS and federal tax law, but from a policy standpoint, which clearly the legislature are the policymakers, but where it comes into play, the one thing to keep in mind is, to my knowledge, most, if not all of these reemployment type ideas would require a change to where once somebody's retired, they'd have to stay retired if they were eligible for the reemployment. In other words, now PERS members can retire, and then if they want to, they can come back to covered employment, continue to work, and then re-retire. As I understand it from Ice Miller, if many of these were implemented, those individuals, those classes, whether they're teachers or law enforcement, whomever, they would have to stay retired. Could y'all speak to that just a little bit, Ice Miller?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Ray, because that's a little bit unique to Mississippi in that the availability you have now to, I think the word often used for you all is coming out of retirement. So Ray's correct. That would have to go away because it raises another federal law issue, which is the impermissible cash or deferred arrangement. What that means is that an individual who's already been a member of the system employed by the same employer cannot have a new election on whether to make a pre-tax contribution or not. So if you have this retiree reemployment, or I'm sorry, in-service distribution put into place, you couldn't allow a retiree to say, do you want to contribute to the system and continue to receive your benefit, or do you not want to contribute to the system and cease your benefit? You can't give them those choices. So you'd have to mandate them in or mandate them out.
And if you mandate them out, different states approach it different ways, but there's an actuarial cost because that person is taking the space of what would be a contributing employee. And so you would address through changing legislation the employer contribution and the employee contribution if there were to be one. So for instance, some states would say the employee must contribute, but will only get a refund of their contributions. They don't earn an additional benefit. Other states might say the employee does not contribute. They're not allowed to earn any additional service credit. They can only contribute to the deferred comp plan, but the employer must make the plan whole on both the employee and employer contribution that would have been made.
Adding to that, I think there has in the past been some discussion about having the member make the employee and employer contribution and forfeit the employee portion, and that we've talked about in the past is not permissible under federal law. They would have to be allowed to have a refund of that.
Well, thank you for all of that. And unless you have further comments, or if there are any other questions or anything, I would suggest maybe let Ed comment a little bit on some of the cost implications.
Yeah, so, instituting a return to work or changing the current return to work provisions, the costs will be figured out by who does it. But as actuaries, we're all making assumptions of when active members are going to retire. There's currently 20,000 active members in PERS who can retire today. They're unreduced. We only get about 4,000 retirements every year. If those 20,000, if you give return to work where they could come back, they obviously have the ability to do that and come back at 50% now or 25% of their final average comp. But if you change that to 100% of coming back, what we would anticipate is there would be a little bit more, more people taking advantage of that potential legislation. So, where we don't assume everybody retires at first eligibility for unreduced. There's a whole schedule in the back of our report that has, 20% of people, when they meet that, will retire. But then, as years go by, they'll retire. But where the cost comes in is those folks who are there going to do this and starting to receive their benefit tomorrow. That would be more than what we would anticipate in that one given year of 4,000 retirements. There could be 6,000, 7,000. So now there's an additional 3,000 potential people now receiving benefits. We still have the same active participants and we're getting contributions on, but now we have X number of additional retirements that we didn't anticipate on that benefit projection stream now. So that is a cost in liabilities today. That's the present value of that benefit payment, that additional benefit payment stream that we didn't anticipate. So again, we wouldn't know the cost until we saw how many people actually took advantage of this legislation, and it would just kind of be embedded in our actual valuation. Now, we would maybe want the employers to pay an additional amount of money for that, or it goes into the ADEC. That's the determination of the cost of where does it go. We ran legislation 2 years ago where we were asked to, well, what was an additional contribution would be on those people's payroll who took advantage of that. And again, we estimated about an additional 3,000 retirements in that first year of the eligibility. And it was a pretty significant increase in the contribution above what we're already asking for now is 25 plus, or 26 plus 9, is 35%. It was an additional percentage above that on their compensation. So
we have a number of people who stop work, stop contribution, leave their money with us. Okay, is there any benefit to the system to put a limitation of how long that money can stay with us before they have to take it out? If we were to limit that number of years in some way.
I'm not sure without looking into it as far as the benefit of the system part.
Though I'll tell you.
Other states, in particular one in I worked in, what happened was you could leave it there, but at 7 years, you either had to come back to work for the state of Tennessee or you had to start drawing it or take it out. If you weren't able to retire and draw it, you had to take it all out and roll it over somewhere, do something like that. Is there any benefit for us to look at something like that? I mean, I don't have a clue. That's the reason I'm asking.
Well, how much interest is that individual earning by keeping their money in PERS?
That's the interest of the
That's set by the board
Right now,
every year,
that's
right?
exactly right.
And it's like 2%.
1%
1% right now.
Currently.
But
Set
that's
by board regulation.
But that's
Close of the fiscal.
right. That money is part of the assets of the fund, right? But you're anticipating to get 7% interest on that money. So
That sounds like it's advantageous to the fund.
advantageous to keep them in.
Okay, I knew that we had 2%. I knew that we were hoping to go and get 7, so that meant we were getting.
I mean, there's an administrative cost to keep them in, yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's really all I had, unless there are other questions or areas of
I had a
discussion.
question. So you're suggesting that the return to work would potentially increase our liability because we're looking at more retirees that we didn't assume during the experience study? Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it's just not knowing, it's one of those
we'd have to
legislative
experience
bills
it
is,
before.
until you have experience, exactly right. You wouldn't know the true cost of it. We can guess based on our assumptions, based on our expertise, and again, just like Audra and Rob mentioned, every state is different. We work for 23 statewide systems, CABMAC does. We see what the experience of it is. There was a bill in another state where they did, they wanted to look at just a 30-day break. But so basically it was a teacher's plan, could retire, take their summer break and come back and teach full time. That's a pretty significant cost. You think a lot of people would do that if they're eligible to do that, so.
And at one point, and Mr. Breland, Chairman Benson, we were at 45 days at one point, return to work. And
That's my understanding, yes.
And then increased to 90. And that was a little to do with,
Yes.
Mr. Benson may know.
Representative Springer did that, I believe.
But we were having a
Long
problem with people
time ago.
having promised employment after retirement.
Well, there was also an emergency mechanism for the executive director to be able to approve, to be able to waive that. Even
45 days, yeah, there was a waiver. So if you prove
That
that,
all went away at the same time, I think.
so if you could prove that there was a need for your position, then the 45 days was waived and then increased to 90.
And I think that's part of the issue is whatever years we've looked at this in the past, we may have been a lot more at full employment, but that's what I'm hearing across the state is we have shortages. We have shortages in the classroom. We have shortages maybe in nursing. We have shortages in public works. So if nobody's working in that job, PERS is not receiving a contribution. So there's an assumption there that if we're able to bring people back into the workforce who are not retiring today, coming back in 30 days, but even the person that retires today that comes back in 30 days, they have foregone building up a larger liability to the system. Because if they worked an extra year in the system, if they're at normal retirement age, they're picking up another 2.5 points that next year and the next year. So I'll leave the expert actuarial analysis to the experts, but I do hear what you're saying is you may have people who say, well, shoot, if I can retire and go work in the future in some similar role, then I'm going to retire. Otherwise, I would have stayed 3 more years, 4 more years. But then you also have people who are coming back into the workforce that aren't in the workforce because we all know it's about total payroll. And because it's an assessment on payroll, and if payroll goes up, that's more contributions. But that payroll assessment on any return to work person has no future liability attached to it. It actually goes to pay the unfunded.
Yeah, definitely.
But do we not pay that retirement for that individual that we weren't paying? So now you owe that person the retirement where you weren't paying that retirement. And
Sure, but they're making a contribution now. And again, I want to let the actuary, because I want to do it right if it's there to be done from a IRS standpoint, but also from
we're looking at we're getting the contribution that we won't have a liability in the future on.
That's correct, which is washing, I think, there because we're picking up 9% actually.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. There definitely is some offsetting factors by getting those additional contributions that we factor into our numbers. And there's definitely benefits outside of the pension plan.
Yeah, there's non-numerical value to have mature and seasoned employees.
My job is for the cost of the pension plan, so there's definitely outside factors as well.
All right, does that conclude the legislative meeting?
One more area if we can. This one should be pretty quick.
Briefly.
Absolutely. It's the last one, PERS requested legislation. Subject to the committee, this could go pretty quickly. It's just 3 areas of legislation. They're behind tab I. They are essentially the same as what the board has approved before. One is the NPL payoff type legislation. That should be the same as last year, except for updating a date. The other is the MDC legislation, same as last year, being driven by changes in federal law, adding the Roth option. The only difference between this year and last year's, it was the primary part was what I just mentioned, but the previous legislation included the quadros, but there were some questions about that. And I talked with Chairman Benson, who's the one that originally requested that, and he agreed that it'll be okay to take that out this time. So that's one minor difference there. But the part that's before you is something that driven by federal changes and that you've approved before. And then the ORP is just a small change. This was in the bill before the board before. You may remember that in the end, last year's ORP reform was passed as a part of House Bill 1. But if you were to look at the standalone legislation or recommendations we had, there was a part that made one small strike through. When the law was created back in the 90s, it says something to the effect of we shall have at least 3 but no more than 5 vendors, and we were proposing to take out the minimum of 3, with the thought being in the future if we wanted to go out for RFP or something and consider consolidating and maybe gaining from economies of scale and being able to pass on some savings to participants. We wouldn't necessarily do this, but this would give the board the option. But again, all 3, those are topics and very similar or the same to last year and maybe the year before. And would like to ask for the board's approval. Regardless, I think our priority this year needs to be PERS funding and, of course, the implementation of Tier 5. but would like to ask for your approval of this, the PERS requested legislation.
To approve.
Does that require a motion?
And you got one.
All right, the motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
There's second. It's been made by somebody.
Shelley got it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
All opposed? No. The motion is passed. Are there any other businesses need to be brought before this board before we recess for the meeting this afternoon?
No, sir. Not on my end.
All right, here none. We will retire till 1 p.m., which would be the board meeting. And incidentally, this chair for the chairman sure is a lot more comfortable than those others. All right, here none, we'll adjourn until 1 o'clock.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Commissioner.